Every single night in Florida, thousands of people, many of them seniors, have no bed, no key, no front door. Here's the mad bit. In 2026, simply bedding down in a public spot can land you in trouble. So tell me, if you can't sleep outside, where do you go? Lawmakers call it order. Critics call it punishment for being poor. And right in the middle sits HB 1365, a rule that changes what cities can allow on pavements, in parks, under bridges. It sounds tidy on paper, until you picture a frail pensioner at 2 a.m., shaking, scanning for a safe corner. Stay with me, because we're going to break down what the law really says, what happens when there's no shelter space, and why this hits older folks hardest. Then I'll walk you through 10 other new Florida laws reshaping life. By the end, you'll see the one detail headlines keep missing. Number 1. HB 1365, Public Sleeping/Camping Crackdown. Picture this. It's gone midnight, your back's aching, you're exhausted, and the only safe-ish place you can find is a park bench or a bit of pavement under a streetlight. For a lot of people, especially older folks living rough, that's not a lifestyle choice, it's survival. HB 1365 steps right into that reality and basically tells local councils, you can't just allow public sleeping or camping on public land anymore. So areas like sidewalks, parks, underpasses, places where people used to quietly get through the night, become much harder for cities and counties to tolerate without breaking the rules themselves. On paper, it's framed as restoring order and keeping public spaces usable. On the street, it can feel like your last option is being labeled a violation. Now, here's the twist people miss. The law doesn't only say don't camp, it pushes counties toward creating designated temporary sites. In theory, that means a specific place where people can stay, rather than being scattered across the city. But those sites come with conditions: planning, location limits, basic safety, sanitation, and some connection to services. And that's where things get messy. If a county hasn't got the money, the space, or frankly the political will to build and run a proper site, then what? That pressure doesn't vanish. It shifts onto the streets, and enforcement becomes a daily reality, being moved along, getting citations, trespass warnings, and in some situations, even arrest if things escalate. For seniors, this can be especially harsh. When you're dealing with arthritis, diabetes, heart issues, or just being physically frail, you can't simply walk somewhere else all night. Constant displacement wrecks sleep, spikes stress, and makes health conditions worse, fast. And it raises a brutal question. If someone has no home and there isn't a realistic bed available, are we solving homelessness, or just moving it out of sight? HB 1365 matters because it isn't just a law about benches and tents. It's a signal that Florida is treating homelessness more like a public order problem than a human survival crisis. Number 2. SB 1808, Patient Overpayment Refunds, Medical Bills. Here's a proper head-scratcher. You go to a clinic, you pay what they ask, you do everything right, and later you find out you actually overpaid. For seniors especially, living on a fixed income, that's not a tiny mistake, that's groceries, rent, or a week of meds. SB 1808 is meant to tackle that exact mess. In plain terms, if a healthcare provider gets more money than they should from you, the rule pushes them to return that extra amount within a set time instead of dragging it out or forgetting about it. Sounds basic, right? But it matters because medical billing can be so confusing that people don't even realize they've been charged too much. Now, don't get it twisted, this law doesn't magically make healthcare cheap. What it does is tighten the behavior around refunds, so patients aren't left chasing their own money for months. And that chase is exhausting. Long phone holds, "we'll call you back," paperwork you never asked for, and the constant feeling you're being bounced around. Seniors can be hit hardest because they often have more appointments, more tests, more prescriptions, meaning more chances for billing errors. And when someone's already stressed or unwell, the last thing they need is to play detective with invoices. So what can you actually do with this? 3 simple moves. First, always ask for an itemized bill, not just a total. Second, keep every receipt, EOB, explanation of benefits, and appointment record in one folder, even if it feels over the top. Third, if you suspect an overpayment, send a short written request. Date of service, amount paid, and why you believe it's extra. Then ask for the refund timeline. This law is basically your leverage to say, "Oi, I've overpaid, sort it." For families supporting seniors, this is one of those quiet laws that can put real money back where it belongs. Number 3. SB 158, Breast Exam Coverage, no extra cost sharing on certain plans. Let's be real, loads of people put off screening because they're scared of the bill. Even when you've got insurance, you still hear words like deductible, copay, out of pocket, and suddenly you're thinking, "I'll do it later." For many older women, especially those juggling rent, food, and medication, later can quietly turn into never. SB 158 is meant to reduce that hesitation by tightening coverage rules for certain breast exams, so patients aren't hit with extra charges for specific diagnostic or supplemental breast examinations under the plans it applies to. In simple terms, the law is trying to make it harder for cost to become the reason someone skips an important check. Now here's the bit that matters. This doesn't mean every test everywhere becomes free for everyone. Coverage depends on the type of plan and the situation, screening versus diagnostic and which policy you're actually on. But it's still a meaningful shift because diagnostic follow-ups are often where surprise costs show up. Someone gets a routine mammogram, then they're told they need a follow-up ultrasound or another exam, and suddenly the price jumps. That's the moment people panic, delay, or cancel. For seniors, delays can be dangerous because health issues are harder to bounce back from when time is lost. So the practical takeaway is, this law nudges the system toward earlier detection by removing at least some of the financial gotchas that scare people away. What should viewers actually do? First, don't assume, verify. Call your insurer or check your plan portal and ask one clear question. Is this breast exam covered with no cost sharing under my plan? Second, when your doctor orders a test, ask them to write down exactly what it is, screening or diagnostic, because billing language changes everything. Third, if you get an unexpected charge, request an itemized bill and challenge it politely but firmly. This is one of those laws that looks boring, until it saves someone from choosing between a health check and the electric bill. Number 4, SB 944, Insurance Take-Back, Deadline, Psychologist Claims Recoupment. Here's a sneaky one that catches people off guard. You get therapy, you pay your share, you think it's sorted, and then months later an insurer turns around and says, actually we paid too much, give it back. It sounds ridiculous, but in the real world it can mean surprise bills, confusing letters, and patients getting dragged into a fight they never started. SB 944 targets that "we're taking the money back later" behavior, at least in the space involving licensed psychologists, by tightening how long insurers have to claw back alleged overpayments. In plain English, it tries to stop insurers from reaching too far back in time and reopening old claims like it's some never-ending story. Why does this matter for ordinary people, especially seniors? Because older adults are more likely to be managing anxiety, grief, depression, memory stress, or caregiver burnout, and therapy isn't a luxury for them, it's stability. When insurers keep the door open for ages, providers can become cautious, billing gets messy, and patients can feel like they're walking on eggshells. Will I get billed later? Did my insurance change its mind? This law is meant to bring more predictability into the system. So if there's going to be a correction, it happens within a clearer, shorter window rather than randomly popping up long after you've moved on. Now, what can you actually do with this in real life? First, keep your paperwork. Save your EOB, explanation of benefits, receipts, and appointment dates in one folder, even if it's just photos on your phone. Second, if you get a surprise bill months later, don't panic, pay, ask for a written breakdown. What date of service, what amount, and why it's being adjusted. Third, if you're supporting a parent or older relative, help them check that the provider is properly in network and that sessions are being coded correctly from day one. It's not glamorous, but this law is about stopping medical billing from feeling like a trapdoor that can open any time. So here's your homework. In the comments, write your one-sentence verdict. HB 1365 is safety or punishment, and tell me why in plain words. Then tap the previous video on your screen because it connects the dots even deeper. We put a massive amount of effort into researching these videos. Please subscribe, it's literally one click, and help us keep doing this. Number 5. HB 655/SB 655, Pet Insurance Consumer Protections. If you've ever tried buying pet insurance, you'll know it can feel a bit like reading a contract written in fog. The brochure says, peace of mind, but the fine print says, we might not pay for that. For loads of families, especially seniors who rely on a pet for companionship, an unexpected vet bill isn't just stressful, it can be heartbreaking. HB 655/SB 655 steps in to make pet insurance less of a guessing game by forcing insurers to be clearer about what they cover, what they don't, and how claims actually work. In simple terms, fewer nasty surprises, more straight answers up front. What does clearer mean in real life? The law pushes insurers to properly disclose key details like waiting periods, how pre-existing conditions are defined, whether they require medical exams or records, and what happens with cancellations or renewals. That matters because insurers often reject claims by pointing to something that existed before the policy, even if it was minor or undocumented. Another common trap is the waiting period. You buy the policy today, your pet gets ill next week, and the insurer says, sorry, you're not covered yet. With stronger disclosure rules, the idea is that you can actually compare policies like a normal human being, instead of finding out the rules only when you're already in a panic at the vet. So here's the practical playbook before you buy. First, ask one blunt question. What exactly counts as a pre-existing condition? Get it in writing. Second, check the waiting period for accidents and illnesses. Some plans treat them differently. Third, look at reimbursement. Do they pay a percentage of the bill, up to an annual limit after a deductible? And finally, this one's important. Keep your pet's medical records tidy, because insurers often use records to decide what they'll pay. This law won't make vet care cheap overnight, but it does make it harder for companies to hide behind confusing wording. For seniors on tight budgets, that clarity can be the difference between keeping a beloved pet healthy or being forced into an impossible choice. Number 6. HB 255/SB 255, Animal Cruelty Offender Registry, FDLE, starts 2026. This one's going to make a lot of people go, hold on, why wasn't this already a thing? HB 255/SB 255 creates a statewide animal cruelty offender registry run through FDLE, Florida Department of Law Enforcement. The idea is simple. If someone has been convicted of certain animal cruelty offenses, their details can become searchable on an official registry. And it's set to kick in January 1, 2026. That means shelters, rescues, and even everyday families could have a clearer way to check whether a person has a history of harming animals before an animal is put at risk again. Now here's why it matters beyond just pet lovers. Animal cruelty is often linked, according to many criminal justice and social service discussions, to broader patterns of violence and neglect, and communities take it seriously because it's not just an animal issue, it can be a public safety signal too. For seniors, this can be especially relevant. Older people are more likely to adopt for companionship, and sadly, they can also be more vulnerable to bad actors when rehoming pets, hiring help, or dealing with neighbors. A transparent registry can act like a warning sign, something you can quickly check instead of relying on gut feelings or rumors. Practical takeaway time. If you're adopting or rehoming a pet in Florida, add one step to your routine, do a quick registry check once it's live. Shelters and rescues can use it as part of screening, and families can use it for peace of mind when they're placing an animal with someone new. Also remember, a registry is a tool, not a magic shield. Still do basic due diligence. Meet in safe places, ask for references, and trust your instincts if something feels off. But overall, this law is meant to shine a light where there used to be darkness, making it harder for repeat offenders to quietly move on to the next victim. Number 7. SB 1080, Impact Fee Increase Rules, Housing Costs Pressure. Here's a quiet one that doesn't sound dramatic, until you feel it in your rent. Impact fees are charges local councils add to new development. Think roads, water, drainage, schools, emergency services. Builders pay them, sure, but let's be honest, a lot of that cost ends up baked into the final price of a home, or passed on through higher rents. SB 1080 tightens the rules on how local governments can raise these fees, aiming to slow down sudden spikes and add more structure around increases. So instead of fees jumping sharply overnight, the law pushes more guardrails, more process, more justification, and more predictable steps. Why does that matter in real life, especially for seniors? Because when housing costs rise, older people on fixed incomes get squeezed first. A pension doesn't magically increase because your county decided to bump fees or because builders raised prices to cover new costs. Even if you're not buying a brand new home, these increases can ripple out. Fewer affordable units get built, landlords face higher costs, and the whole market tightens. And when the market tightens, the people at the edge, folks already choosing between meds and rent, get pushed closer to the street. That's why laws like SB 1080 sit in the background of bigger issues like homelessness and housing insecurity, even though most headlines won't mention them. So what can you actually do with this information? First, if you're a homeowner or renter, keep an eye on your county or city meeting agendas. Impact fees get discussed in public, but usually when no one's watching. Second, if you're budgeting for a move, ask blunt questions. Are any local fee changes coming that could affect prices? Third, if you're supporting an older parent, treat housing decisions like a long game. Look at stability, not just today's price. This law won't instantly make Florida housing affordable, but it does matter because it's about how fast costs can climb. And in a state where many seniors are already hanging on by their fingernails, even quiet cost increases can hit like a sledgehammer. Number 8. SB 913, Condo/Co-op Transparency, Minutes, Records, and What They're Not Telling You. If you've ever lived in a condo, you'll know the biggest shocks don't come from the weather, they come from the association. One day everything's normal, and the next you're staring at a letter about a special assessment that feels like it's dropped out of the sky. For seniors especially, that can be terrifying because a fixed income doesn't have room for surprise thousands. SB 913 is meant to tackle that exact problem by pushing condo and co-op associations to make key information easier to access. Things like meeting records and important documents. So owners aren't left guessing what's happening behind closed doors. In simple terms, fewer whispers, more paper trail. Here's why this matters. A lot of big decisions are made in meetings most people don't attend. Maintenance contracts, reserve funding, building safety work, legal disputes, rule changes. And when owners can't easily see what was discussed or decided, it creates a perfect recipe for confusion and mistrust. SB 913 nudges associations to put more of these records online and keep them available, which makes it harder for leadership to say, "Oh, that was mentioned months ago," when no one could realistically find it. It's not about stirring drama, it's about making sure ordinary residents can actually check. What was voted on? Who approved it? What's the timeline? And crucially, how much is it going to cost us? Practical takeaway: if you or your parents live in a condo/co-op, treat the association portal like a monthly health check. Look for meeting minutes, budgets, reserve studies, if available, upcoming projects, and any hints of large repairs. If something sounds vague, major maintenance, structural work, urgent remediation, don't just accept it. Ask for the supporting documents in writing and request clear numbers. Total cost, per unit share, payment schedule, and whether loans are involved. And if you're buying a condo in Florida, use this law's spirit as your checklist before you sign. Review the documents, scan the minutes for red flags, and don't be shy about walking away if the story doesn't add up. Because in condo life, the real danger isn't what you can see, it's what you didn't know was coming. Number 9, SB 954, Recovery Residence Approvals, Sober Homes but with clearer rules. Here's something most people only notice when it hits their street. A recovery residence opens nearby, and suddenly the whole neighborhood is arguing, half the people saying, "This is a lifeline," and the other half saying, "Not here." SB 954 steps into that tension. In plain terms, it pushes local councils to create a clearer, more organized process for approving certified recovery residences, places where people in recovery from substance use live in a structured, supportive environment. The goal isn't to dump chaos into communities, it's to stop the approvals process from being a confusing maze where decisions depend on politics, panic, or who shouts the loudest at a meeting. Now, why does this matter to regular families and especially seniors? Because addiction doesn't only affect the person using, it affects parents, grandparents, carers, and whole households. For an older mom looking after an adult son, or a grandparent raising a grandchild because the parents are struggling, stable recovery housing can be the difference between progress and relapse. But here's the catch: when councils delay approvals or make the process inconsistent, it can create a shortage of legitimate, well-run homes, while dodgy operators still try to slip through. SB 954 tries to reduce that Wild West vibe by encouraging a smoother route for properly certified residences, so support systems can exist without every home having to fight a brand new battle just to open. Practical takeaway: if someone in your family is looking for a recovery residence, don't just pick the first place with a nice website. Ask directly, "Are you certified? By whom? Can I see it?" Then ask about real-life safeguards, house rules, relapse policy, staff oversight, medication storage, and how they connect residents to treatment and work. And if you're a neighbor worried about a new home opening, focus on standards, not stigma. Push for certification, accountability, and clear communication instead of blanket no. Because the truth is, a well-run recovery home can make a community safer, and a badly run one can do the opposite. This law is about making sure the good ones aren't blocked while the bad ones slip around the edges. Number 10, SB 1105, Alternative Credentials, Skills that Actually Count. Here's the uncomfortable truth: loads of people are working hard, learning new skills, even doing short courses and certifications, and still getting shut out because they don't have the right piece of paper. For seniors trying to re-enter work, for people who lost jobs, or for anyone who can't afford a long degree, that's brutal. SB 1105 is meant to push Florida's education system to create clearer guidance around alternative credentials, things like industry certifications, technical badges, and other recognized skill proofs, so they're documented and treated more consistently. In simple terms, it's about making sure skills learned outside the traditional route don't get ignored. Why does this matter in day-to-day life? Because the job market has changed, but the way we prove competence often hasn't. A person might be brilliant at IT support, caregiving, bookkeeping, or skilled trades, but if employers, schools, or agencies don't understand the credential, it gets dismissed. Seniors face this in a very particular way. They might have decades of experience but need a modern credential to get hired hired again, switch roles, or qualify for training support. SB 1105 nudges the system to define and standardize what counts, so a credential isn't just a random PDF. It's something schools can track, employers can recognize, and job seekers can actually use to move forward. Now, the practical takeaway: if you're trying to improve your employment chances in Florida, start thinking in terms of portable skills. Look for credentials tied to real jobs, like healthcare support roles, cybersecurity basics, bookkeeping software, trade certifications, or language/customer service certificates. Then make sure you keep proof in one place: certificate, dates, issuing organization, and what skills it covered. For families helping seniors, this can be a smart move too. Short credentials are often less overwhelming than full programs, and they can open doors faster. SB 1105 won't guarantee anyone a job, but it can make the system less snobby about where learning happens. Because at the end of the day, the question shouldn't be, where did you study? It should be, can you do the work? So when you hear new laws, it's easy to think it's all politics and paperwork. But as you've seen, these laws land on real people, on seniors counting pennies, on families trying to stay afloat, and on anyone one bad month away from sleeping in a car or on a bench. And that's why HB 1365 feels so explosive, because it doesn't just change a rule, it changes what society treats as acceptable in public spaces. If someone has no home and there isn't a safe bed available, then telling them you can't sleep here isn't a solution, it's a shove. The scary part is the question it leaves behind: where do you go at 2 a.m.? At the same time, Florida's other new laws show the state moving in two directions at once. Some rules add protection, like clearer refunds for medical overpayments, more transparency in condos, and stronger disclosures in pet insurance. Others tighten control, reshape costs, or change how communities manage difficult realities like recovery housing. Put together, it's a reminder that laws don't just exist. They quietly decide who gets help, who gets pressure, and who gets forgotten. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think Florida is fixing the root causes: housing, healthcare, jobs? Or is it mostly pushing the problem out of sight? Drop your thoughts in the comments, especially if you live in Florida or you've seen these changes up close. If this video helped you understand what's really happening, hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs it. And check the next video on your screen for more breakdowns of laws, rights, and real-life survival tips.